At the 2024 U.S. African Studies Association annual meeting in Chicago, Illinois, Africanist scholars convened the Wednesday before the conference itself for a Professionalization and Career Training, or PACT, workshop, sponsored by ASA and the Emerging Scholars Network. An immersive one-day workshop designed to equip young scholars, grad students, and early career professionals with the skills needed to effectively share their research through podcasting. The workshop included expert insights, training, and, importantly, transferable skills for the participants. And the day was packed full of intriguing ideas, strategic planning, and even some professional recordings. We are excited to share some of the highlights with you. I spoke first. I'm a professor of history at Michigan State University and a podcaster. I've been hosting the Africa Past and Present podcast since 2008, first with Peter Lim and then on my own. And I discussed the nature of independent scholarly podcasting and its ongoing impact on Africa-related research, teaching, and career development. Take a listen. Preparing for these interviews with experts means reading, and reading a lot. So I use the interview preparation as a further incentive, I should say, to keep up with the scholarly literature, which, as you all know, is just exploded, largely, in my opinion, due to supply-side economics, where the journal empires are just, producing more and more and more and more to justify those extortionate subscription rates that they charge our university libraries. And also to read beyond my field of expertise. I mean, I am who I am, an Italian-born scholar who works in North America, not an African, who has spent 3 decades working on Southern African history, particularly South Africa. There's a lot that I don't know, and the more I go forward, the less I know, frankly. And so it's a great opportunity for me to read beyond my field of expertise, upskilling. I think it has helped my writing. I went from being a fairly conventional didactic writer to being less didactic and having a flow in my prose that is more comfortable with being closer to the spoken form. And it's challenging because, as you all know, academics think that writing in complicated ways is somehow a marker of sophistication. And having read a lot of French scholars, it's true. And also, in Italy, we're taught that the longer the paragraphs, the smarter you are. And I spent most of my high school life here, where my English teacher kept putting red marks through all of my run-on sentences and saying, no, in English we write very direct, subject, verb, object, and I said, but that's too simple. So I like to think that it's changed the way I write in a positive way. It's also sparked some new interest. I had no interest in digital history before I went to Michigan State, and now I have a book that I'm finishing next year on podcasting. So it keeps things exciting. Historians in particular are very solitary scholars. We pride ourselves on spending endless hours in archives or having maybe one-on-one interviews with collaborators. I like to think that I've become a lot less isolated as a scholar, less lonely through collaboration, because podcasting is all about collaboration and relationships. Absolutely. And you'll hear that from my colleagues, I'm sure. And now, so many years in, Africa Past and Present's website is kind of an archive of snapshots of African studies state of the field over time. And I think that's really neat. I never thought of that when we started, but here we are almost 2 decades in, and now you can go back to 2009, 2012, and see kind of what was hot at that particular time, or how projects have evolved, or how scholars have changed their approach or their topics. Effects on teaching. Because pedagogy, these days involves being very creative and pushing the envelope, so to speak. We now have a free online resource. There's no charge to use the website, so you can use any one of the podcasts for instructional purpose. I think in the classroom now, I've pretty much ditched my notes. I mean, it's partly because I'm old, but part of it is that I think students react better to somebody who's well prepared, but who can synthesize things in a clear way and is more of an edutainer than simply an old school educator. And podcasting has really helped me in that respect. And student evaluations have been telling me over the past few years that they find the podcast pedagogy that I use useful in making the learning that they do more personally meaningful. For example, multimedia course content is something that resonates with this generation of students in particular. That doesn't mean I don't assign books and articles. It just means that podcasts are assigned as part of the material that they need to listen to and engage and understand. Instead of writing a paper, and I guess in the age of AI, there's some additional benefits to doing podcasts because it's not as easy to rely on ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you. But it creates an interesting opportunity for students to be historians through audio. And so just an example of this, going back to Trevor Getz's book that I mentioned earlier, Primer on Teaching African History, he has a nice quote on Afropod that I want to share with you. If I can get through this slide, there we go. About how to assign podcasts as content and why, and what they can do for us. He says, this is a quote, when I use Africa Past and Present, writes Getz, or other podcasts in the classroom, I frequently ask students to respond to a set of questions that I've drawn up beforehand. Some of these questions relate to the topic of the interview, but several also ask them to critically assess the interview format and to consider why Lim and Alegi ask certain questions or how the interviewee chose to respond to these questions. I try to get students to understand the interview and the production of history more broadly as a conversation between scholars, critics, and the public. The episode with Wando Achebe, for example, allows me to ask about why Achebe felt driven to write about a female warrant chiefly office holder. This is in colonial Igbo land, Nigeria. Which aspects of colonialism she and the host chose to emphasize, and the assertions made about the use of oral history as a source. Because these issues are entangled with a really good story, students generally respond to them successfully, and I can then draw them into the wider course material I present on these topics. So, effects on career development, and then I'll close. I think overall it's been positive, but it has had some drawbacks, to be honest. The biggest drawback is that podcasting is a time-consuming enterprise. I believe in doing little things and doing them well, even though I'm a terrible gardener, ironically. So I'm not one of these people who has huge ambitions of doing amazing things. I like to do small things and try and be good at that. But it takes an enormous amount of time. And we all know that we have research duties, teaching duties, admin duties, service duties, family or, life duties. And so one has to be very careful about embarking on something that's going to add to those responsibilities and commitments. And it has taken away, honestly, from doing more conventional academic stuff. So be aware of that. It's good to do it post-tenure, in my opinion. But I think that could be changing in the current landscape. I think there's more openness to junior faculty embarking on this and considering that as part of your overall portfolio. It's enhanced my visibility somewhat. A few ASA ago, somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, I'm a big fan of your podcast." And I blushed because I thought that was really weird, but I was also kind of pleased, obviously. And I think I have a wider, more diverse audience. It's not just South Africanists who read my work or know my name, but also people who listen to the podcast. And I made many friends as a result. Maybe some enemies too. I like to think that I'm a little more versatile in the classroom and more creative. And certainly my digital scholarship, like others on this panel, I put it front and center. I mean, I see people in my department and at my university claiming all sorts of stuff that I wouldn't consider terribly scholarly and making a big deal about it. And so why be shy? If you're putting your time and effort and you're doing it seriously, put it there. This is not the only thing I do, but it's part of the mix. And I really have renewed my ethical commitment through this podcast to disseminate Africanist colleagues' work, ideas, and voices in academia. But not just in academia, because podcasting reaches out, spills out of academia, in media, in policymaking, for those who are curious and interested enough to listen, and the general public, frankly. And at least a couple of podcasts that other people are doing now have stemmed from engagement with our podcast. For example, Msiaki Bona Clark's wonderful Hip Hop African podcast. She and I met in the basement of that ASA meeting in Washington in 2016. And she was like, I really wanted to see how you guys did this and the microphones and everything. We had an amazing conversation. And, a couple of weeks later, she went, all in on doing podcasting with her students, and now she's a star with the longest running podcast on African hip hop culture. And another one is Tabiso Boise Kumalo, former Major League Soccer player and now coach in Michigan, who came to MSU, visited my class, and we did some podcasts together with him and a life history podcast of his incredible life. And now he runs his own podcast called Telling Our Football Stories, which focuses mainly on black coaches, player agents, and also footballers. And you can check it out. One of my favorites is with the Liberian coach Worte Sampson, who then emigrated as a result of the Civil War in Liberia to the United States. And he gives this incredible life history in this conversation with Boise. And so it's, to me, that's the best thing that could happen, is others pick up the ball and start running with it. Next on our panel was Dr. Bamba Ndiaye, an assistant professor of African Studies at Emory University's Oxford College, and a former Mellon postdoc at Cornell University's Society for the Humanities. Dr. Ndiaye is also the host of the Africanist podcast, and he shared his personal experience with academic podcasting, focusing on monetization and the use of AI.
Podcasting is a great academic tool, but it is also a great way to make money if that's what you want to do, right? And to give you just few numbers here that I think are going to be useful. In 2022, podcasting, the global value of podcasting was $2.22 billion. And then by 2030, it is projected that podcasting will generate about $18 billion. So there's lots of money to be made in podcasting, if that's the route you want to take. Now, according to AAB, they did an interesting research on podcast advertising revenue in the United States. So since we're here, just in the United States, the advertising market for podcasting is about $2 billion. And most people make money, podcast money, through advertising, right? And we will talk more about how to do that and things to consider if you want to monetize your podcast. Let's talk about the foundations of monetization. There are some prerequisites you need to have if you decide to make money off of your podcast. My podcast is free. I don't make any money off of it, not yet. I think Peter, yours is free too. Yep. But if I wanted to do so, there are ways and means to do that easily, right? And it does not matter if you have a large audience or not. You could start doing that on day one, really, because podcasting is, yes, about reaching a large audience, but it is also about having a niche audience, right? And it's very good to bear that in mind as you proceed in this enterprise. Now, the first thing you want to have is quality content. So high quality and consistent content basically creates value, right? Podcast is a value creation, right? And content quality starts really from the topic that you are covering in your podcast to the recording, to the equipment. Think about people you want to invite. Think about the topic you want to cover. And make sure that you have the adequate preparation to engage with your audience. Whether you are doing interview style podcasts like the one I do, or you want to do storytelling, right? It takes a lot of work to give people good content, okay? So that's number one. Number two, when you record, of course, make sure also the output is of great quality. Sometimes I go back to listen to my first episode, the first episode that I ever made, and I cringe. I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I released this out there to the world. It was so bad." Right? But I told myself, okay, it was the first time I was learning, I literally recorded it with my phone in my kitchen, right? And it was so bad. I didn't know how to edit sound yet, didn't know how to clean up sound and things like that. So you hear everything going on in the kitchen, right? But it was a great episode. And ironically, still one of the highest downloaded episodes of the whole podcast. So some people out there like it. Number two is audience engagement, okay? It's very important to think about growing your audience and having an active and dynamic audience. And you have great tools for that, such as social media, okay? You are your own promoter. You have to promote your podcast. You have to use digital technology. People love X or Facebook, TikTok. All these platforms are important when you start podcasting and start sharing content, okay? And of course, you will hit different audiences depending on the platform that you are using. If you go on TikTok, of course, it's probably a younger audience who might not be really interested in, for instance, what I do in terms of podcasting. But it still helps you to get the podcast out there, get a large following. Every time I publish a new episode, my younger brother takes it and he's a big TikTok person in Senegal, and then he puts it on TikTok, right? I'm like, why is he doing this? But I see sometimes clips of my podcast on places that I did not, think they would get there, right? But also, X is a good platform for that. I know some people now have mixed feelings about X, but really, if you want to go this route, you should really consider using that to grow and engage with your audience. The other thing is one of the other foundational things to consider in monetizing is collaborate with other podcasters in your domain, right? If you know of anyone else doing something similar, invite them to your podcast and have them invite you on their podcast. Do a mashup podcast or mashup episodes. I've done that with the Ufahamu Africa podcast, which is a podcast that I really like, run by Kim John and Rachel Bailey Riedel. I would love to do one with Peter soon, right? But if you have your podcast and know of other podcasters, talk with them, okay? Invite them, engage with their work, and allow them to engage with your podcast. That's a great way to create value. And then optimize your presence on search engines. So this goes along with, for instance, having a nice, decent website where people can find you. And you will be surprised how many people will reach out to you, organizations, news media, through that website and through your podcast. Like I can tell you how many requests I get on a regular basis of people or organizations say, hey, we would like to talk to you. We saw that you talked about X, Y, and Z on your podcast, and we want to know more, right? So those are good ways to start monetizing your podcast, because those people, those organizations could potentially be advertisers on your podcast in the future. Now, the last thing I want to mention here is the use of AI in podcasting. As you know, AI is a very powerful tool that can do a lot of things, and it can facilitate your podcasting. Podcasting is very time consuming, and thankfully now with AI, there are a lot of things that you can do without spending a lot of time on it. For instance, if you want to transcribe your interviews, which is good sometimes. I've done some interviews and then transcribe them and publish them in blog posts, such as Africa is a country, things like that, right? So if you want to do that, there are tools out there that allows you to do that automatically, right? And one of them is you have Podbean AI that can do that easily. Descript is certainly one of the most powerful AI tools out there. Descript is awesome, especially if you want to do video podcasting. I will suggest using Descript, right? And it turns your video into audio. It cuts out, words that you don't want, stabilizers and things like that easily. But it also helps with audio editing. Sometimes, especially if you don't have a studio and you record in an open space like this, the sound quality will not be top. But with AI, with the click of a button, it can give you studio quality audio. And Adobe AI does that very well. If you have a, let's say, recording that is less than 30 minutes long, it's free. You just upload it, click a button, and then it gives you a studio quality rendering. It's amazing. Podbean does that. Descript also does that. And there are so many other tools that can help you achieve that quality of audio. And then voice cloning and dubbing, if that's something you're interested in, taking your podcast and automatically translating it into another language, right? Wondercraft can do that. And that will also help you widen your audience. You could take a podcast in English and turn it into a podcast in Swahili or French or something like that. And then music and sound effects. I love inserting music in my podcast, but you also have Sunu AI that can easily generate music for you that you can insert anywhere on your podcast. You just give them a prompt, make a hip hop sound for protest movement, and then it generates it easily, and then you copy and paste on your podcast.
Third on the panel was Dr. Reginold Royston, a media anthropologist and digital humanities researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the School of Information and the Department of African Cultural Studies. Dr. Royston mapped the African podscape based on his published research.
Since 2018, we've seen a tremendous growth in accessibility to African digital audio, particularly podcasting. And 2018 was kind of the beginning, or a high mark, if you will, of flowering of podcasting on the African continent. So as I say, my work has been mostly digital scholarship, analyzing the landscape of podcasting on the African continent. A lot of diasporans have figured prominently in that audio production, in many ways even obscuring what's happening on the continent. So again, another reason for the flowering in 2018 was really important to see so many podcasters from the continent gain visibility, because platforms have been an issue. And so even today, what we see on the African continent is a lot of radio stations and outlets dominating the podcaster landscape. That's an entirely different genesis from the kind of consumer, producer, prosumer identity around podcasting that started in the early 2000s and even after Serial in 2014, which is considered in the West kind of the blossoming or the flowering of podcasting. So if you want to read about that history and look into the scholarship, I have a publication in New Media and Society called Podcasting and New Orality in the African Mediascape. And that continues a trajectory around audio culture that I have another article For those focused on research and thinking analytically around sound, close listening for audiobooks is a framework that myself and my colleague, former student Vincent Agati, developed and I think that article came out in 2024. It's called Voicing Afro-Modernity, and it provides strategies for close listening. You know, we think about close reading. Let's try close listening, right? I'll get into that a little bit. And additionally, if you want to hear a podcast that I'm actually on talking about audio culture in Africa, it's called Podcast Studies, and you can just use my name to find that. And that's one thing I'll say today. I probably have a better understanding of the podcasting landscape from the continent up till about 2022, right? Because things change dramatically. From a technological perspective, most theorists say every 18 months, Moore's law, when circuits change, right? There's a new innovation in technology. So there might be something that transforms, within that time cycle as well. Maybe not the most historical perspective around technology change, but you can kind of see the way businesses work and technology cycles develop. Yes, every 18 months, every 2 years, the culture is going to change dramatically. So the best information that I have is probably up till about 2022, and that information was dated already. What's exciting and what's developing and what's available out there is opportunity to get into this field. And this has been a really rich discussion for both thinking historically what has that landscape looked like, the impact in scholarship, and how to get into the field in those ways. Bamba, I learned a lot from this monetization talk. And this is very important, thinking about how to support your work, right? So you can see in the recent controversy with Africa Stream, right? And even if you don't know where to land on that, right? The ability to push past the influence of, like, let's say BBC or Apple or Spotify in terms of media organizations and media platforms is very important to center and to advance our voices and our scholarship, right? Even beyond the university, right? I would love to claim, and I do claim, digital media, digital production as scholarly, right? What's happening on these podcasts is certainly scholarly, but we also want that information for developing, advancing, and giving agency to African people, right? So this is very important that we learn how to sustain, not just produce. A couple of things to think about in terms of your content. So some of the theoretical ways I approach it in my research, and part of this is riffing off of the talk that Peter Alegi gave to the Eye on Africa about, I think that was about 8 months ago or 6 months ago, right? Yeah. So maybe there's 3 ways to think about your content for podcast production. Is it dialogic? Is it dialectic? Is it didactic? Right? Three dimensions of this. Dialogic, I would say, and how I talk about it in my work, is interview-based, or let's say chat-based, sometimes roundtable, sometimes called the banter section of a podcast, right? It can be all those elements. Dialectic would be kind of a journalistic interaction, Q&As, but these could also be schematic, right? Less interesting are the podcasts that have a set of 7 questions that they ask every interviewer and don't break from that form, right? I talk about that in my article on podcasting and new orality, right? It's an innovative way you could think about that. Okay, maybe that's a kind of schematic form of storytelling. That may help us understand it in that way, but it's not always very interesting. What it does do is help people create content, right? And so you might want to think about in your content production, if you are segmenting, which seems important, right? An introduction, you want to get to the mid-roll, yes, right? So there should be segments, right? So it could be useful to have a very strict form that you use over a season, right? It may not be interesting over 5 seasons. People will start to tune out, right? But that is I would say, sort of an innovation, not always the most creative. There's the didactic qualities. We're talking about monologues, audio essay, or again, you could think about schematic forms of exchange as being didactic. And then there's of course, narrative. Now, a lot of people equate podcasting with storytelling. I don't think that's the most accurate way to think about it. There are different kinds of storytelling, right? There are many different kinds of storytelling. From our African historical perspective, African history, African studies, orality, oral literature has been key to our field, right? So it's part of what's interested in me. What is this intersection between podcasting and oral literature, right? Is podcasting a form of oral literature? Yes, I believe it is, or it can be, right? Is it a form of storytelling? Well, sometimes it can be, right? Is that extemporaneous storytelling about, how I started my business? Well, that may be an extemporaneous story, or it may be, a marketing narrative that you have, right? Or it could be an extemporaneous story when there are questions with great follow-ups, and I think those keep people engaged. Or it could be storytelling focused, produced, scripted storytelling, right? So there's possibilities there, right? But let's say a round table, banter, or some other kind of approaches, monologues, for instance, are not necessarily what we would think of strictly as storytelling. So the other thing I want to talk about is producing content. So I've talked about, let's say, some theoretical approaches to understanding and thinking about podcasts and what's happening during podcasting. Dialogue, dialectic, didactic, right? So when it comes time to producing your content, we want to think of the interchange there. The interchange of narrative, the interrelationship of all these elements, right? I think what's been said already is that podcasting is an art form. It's not simply that we've had great stories or you're a good conversationalist. You have to marry that to technical capacities, right? Production, sustaining it, funding it, getting all the staff that we have here, utilizing those resources, what's happening with the microphones, obviously, right? What's happening with your computers, editing software, et cetera, right? But we shouldn't get hung up necessarily on form and content, right? We shouldn't be so obsessed about format that we're not iterating, right? You should be focused on your unique voice and what that means, right? Not simply how do you sound, because you'll sound terrible, right, when you first start, and you won't like your voice. I know this has been said everywhere, right? And you'll have to figure out how to like your voice, how to love your voice, and how to produce and perform, right? Because there's performative aspects of this. If you find yourself trying to copy somebody who is a celebrity or is out there, right? Is that you? Is that where you want to go? You'll be trapped by that, right? So rather, invent your own voice, find your own voice and style.
Finally, Dr. Dean Rehberger of Matrix, Center for Digital Humanities and Social Sciences at Michigan State University, and Michael Green of the MSU African Studies Center provided participants with technical expertise and post-production considerations to the participants.
You can do a brilliant movie, and the video quality can be a little off, and people will still watch it. But if the sound is off, people are just going to walk away. Sound is the most important thing, and you want to do it well. So with that in mind, just a few things. We'll start at kind of the cheaper end. You really can nowadays just use your telephone. It's amazing how good quality, and you can get, for less than $100, you can get a really top end. This is a Shure microphone that will record really good sound. Matter of fact, this phone, the reason it's pink is it's my spouse's old phone. I basically took all the apps off it and just have a recorder on it, and I just used the phone for recording and nothing else. So this, I really like this setup. It keeps it really solid, but it is only one microphone. My ultimate favorite, and I love this for oral history, but it also works well for podcasting. This is by Synco, and it basically attaches to your phone. It can do Android or it can do iPhones. You just have to buy the one with the right connector. And then basically it has 2 lavalier mics. It's only about $35, $40. You can get 2 of them. They attach right here. And the reason I love it for oral history, but it works for podcasting, is unlike a microphone that's into your face, you can forget about this. Right? You're talking to someone, you're just having a conversation, and they forget about a lavalier mics. So lavalier mics can be really good for a lot of reasons. They keep the mic in the same place, and they're easy to forget about when you're talking to people. The other thing you can do is you can just use your laptop. And with a couple good USB mics, usually good USB mic, my favorite is Yeti. And they're really solid, really good, but you can pick up a good USB mic for about $50 or so. Yeti is about $80, $75 to $90, depending on where you buy it. The other thing that I really like, I'm a fan of Zoom recorders, and there's a whole set of Zoom recorders that run usually from about $99 to $300 or $400. This one that we've been using today is my favorite for podcasting. It's the P4. The nice part about this is it runs about $150. It has 4 channels that you can use, and it allows you to do levels. My favorite part of this one is this little doohickey over here is a Bluetooth. And one of the channels actually allows you, if you have someone that's calling in on a smartphone, you can actually have them do part of the interview on the smartphone. So you can have 2 people in your that you're talking to in your studio, and 1 person on a telephone. You can all have a conversation, and it's going to be picked up and recorded. So that's really nice. You'll see that most of your recorders are 16-bit, 24-bit, and now 32-bit. Right? 16-bit used to be CD quality. Right? 24-bit is high quality. That's what your P4 is going to do. This is 32-bit. It's basically saying at every point along the sound wave, I'm going to capture a lot of information. I'm capturing so much information with this. If you shout at me, I don't care. If you whisper at me, I don't care. I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to get all that sound. So when you go to put it into Audacity, you're going to be able to play with the levels and get everything normalized. And Audacity is actually a 32-bit audio software, right? You have to check, not all audio software will do 32-bit, but if you do something like this. The problem is this runs about $250, right? So it is a little more on the higher end side of that. With that said, so these are the cheaper things that you can get, and you can pick up nice dynamic microphones that go into this for $50. They're not very expensive. You do want to make sure you'll notice that when you come up and look at some of the equipment that all of these things are really heavy because it's really the vibration that can send off the sound and things like that. So that's often why you find that good microphones, like a Yeti, is really heavy. These things are really heavy to make sure that you don't get that vibration, right? If you want to, and Mike can kind of go over that, set up more of a studio kind of setup like we have there. That can run you.
I mean, you can go as expensive as you want. You're not going to spend too much probably on audio, but I mean that I would say around a little under $2,000 to get that full setup, and that's 8 years old. So.
Right. So you can do a good studio kind of setup between $1,000 to $10,000, depending on how much you want to spend and how much you want to do. The important part there, of course, again, is not only to have good quality mics to pick up the sound, good quality equipment. The most important thing is your room, right? You want to, not only have a small room, It's good to have a smaller room as possible that you're in. That's why you always see studios are not that big. And then you want to have, stuff on the wall to dampen the sound. And then you want to put a big piece of foam in the corners because corners cause really bad problems with sound. Of course, you could do this with blankets. There's really simple, cheap ways to do this. Pillows. To dampen sound, but you're amazing how much that can help do things like that.
One of the most exciting aspects of the workshop was the opportunity that participants had to record their own mini podcast episodes, kind of like mini pilots. Consider these early productions as the beginning of some fantastic digital scholarship by these Africanist scholars. Black Women in STEM podcast.
And you're welcome to the ASA Packed Workshop podcast session. And today we're going to be talking to the creator of the Black Women in STEM podcast, Joanna. So first of all, Black Women in STEM.
I know, right? Black women in STEM.
I don't know if I've ever come across any podcast that, is like specifically about that. So do you want to just tell us like why? Like literally, that's just like the first. Why do you want to do that?
Yeah. So Black women in STEM, they are like very marginalized, very small. No one really talks about them, and that's like the real idea behind this podcast. I just want to like bring them out there, let their voices be known, let everyone really know about them, their experiences, their challenges, even their successes, and everything they go through. So yeah, Black women in STEM.
Okay. I know that we had like a bit of a conversation before, and I'm curious, like you've done podcasting before, right?
Yeah, sure. So I have this other podcast. It's called Joe's Life. I just talk about basically my life. I talk about issues on women, issues for youth, applications to grad school in the US, and just other stuff generally.
Okay, so basically with this transition in the podcast, you're sort of like changing or like moving focus into more of the things that you're working on in grad school. Am I correct?
Yeah. So it's not really like changing. It's more like incorporating what I do now with what I used to do. Mm-hmm. I've always been interested in women issues. I've always been interested in telling other people's stories. So what this podcast will be about, Black Women in STEM podcast, will be me telling the stories of these women in STEM and just putting them out there so people will know what they are really going through, and then who knows, governments will be able to come up with interventions just to stop the marginalization with Black women in STEM. I've always wanted to prove myself, to prove myself. Otherwise, like tell people out there that I'm a woman and I don't have to be constricted to what the society makes of me. Mm-hmm. I want to show them that I am capable of doing so much more.
Yes.
And I think that is really where the interest of women came into play. And then my information science, we do a lot of technology stuff.
Yes.
And I've always been interested in technology. I've done stuff on digital divide. I've done stuff on cyberbullying. And I'm like, yeah, STEM could be like a broader aspect of technology. So instead of just like checking out the technology aspect alone, let me just venture
conversation. I think the last question I'm going to ask is, what should we? I know you've told us like a lot about your podcast, but what's the one thing that you want us to like look forward to and just be on our toes and be like, yeah, this is the podcast. What should we look forward to?
So I want you guys to look forward to the interesting stories of those women. Like I've done a lot of studies, and it's most times when I'm like reading a literature, I'm just so glued to that paper because there are women out there willing to tell their stories. They need to tell their story of resilience, how they've been challenged just for being a female, and how they've been challenged just for being black. And then how they've been challenged for being a black female in STEM. I want you to be so expectant of these stories of these women, and also to be inspired because despite all the challenges these women went through, they still made it in STEM. They still hold leadership positions in STEM, and they are so proud of themselves. And that is what I want you to look forward to.
Thank you so much, Joanna.
This
has been such a lovely conversation. Guys.
Eating with Historians podcast.
Let's start it off by talking about the food that we don't like. Growing up, what has been like your worst food experience? Essentially, I want you to tell me a food that you like. Tell yourself, I now have money. I'm not going to eat this ever. You know? Something that you just like, no.
Does it have to be never going to eat it or the worst food experience, at least at initial contact? Because I have a food story.
Yes, that's what we want to hear.
Okay. It has to do with leaves and salad and a huge bowl. So when I had first come to the US, I was limited in my understanding of the culinary landscape. So we went to the restaurant, and the only thing I could recognize on the menu was salad. My mistake was that I assumed salad was what salad meant back in Nigeria, which, for context, a lot of the times salad is synonymous with coleslaw. So I ordered
Southern Africa as well.
Yeah. So I ordered salad, and pretty much soon I had a huge bowl filled with green leaves and few random floating seeds of tomato and stuff right in front of me. So I asked, I said, where is the salad? And I was told, this is it. And a lot of people tried to convince me that, it was delicious, but I've never had, salad in the American sense in that way before. So it took a lot of learning, and I remember myself just sitting and chewing away and feeling kind of like...
I hope it didn't cost too much, because I also have a similar pattern where I was starving and they brought me these leaves as well, and I was like, yeah, this is not going to slide. So now every time I'm in a restaurant, I always emphasize that I want something with meat because of that. Yeah, so I do resonate with you on that.
And as a Nigerian, if you are eating salad, the green leaves, then you'll be equated to a goat.
Yes.
Chewing like a goat, because it's goats that eat green things.
So you don't like green things. What do you like?
No, I do like green things now.
Like a goat. Okay.
The thing is, I think where we come from, we mostly boil or cook the leaves, but here is the opposite, because they tend to prepare them sort of raw, and then just like you mentioned, goats goats are known for eating green leaves, and so we say, oh, you are just eating grass. In our Igbo language, you say afifia, you're just eating grass. That's how we see it. We don't see it as food.
Yes, and speaking of which, by here we are at the ASA Pact Workshop in Chicago, and I just want to then draw onto this idea of when they see you eating salad and they equate it to a goat or an animal, the social status that then surrounds different foods. What food then do you eat and make sure that your curtains are open and everyone can see that you're eating this? That food that gives you the status when you walk, that yes, the Instagram photo picture that everyone see that today, fork and knife, this is me.
Well, to be honest, I'm very much open-minded now about food than I was maybe 10 years ago, because of traveling all over the world and experiencing other places and other foods. I'm very adventurous that way now, but it has not always been that way. But I still find myself preferring my typical Nigerian meals, and wherever in the world I am, I'm always craving for that. So I live in South Africa, and I've been there for 8 years, and you find that in my house I still make my Nigerian food, and that's the kind of food, to answer your question, that I will eat, and I want everybody to know that I'm eating my jollof rice or my soup.
Yes.
No, it's obvious.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
How?
I am an Ibibio woman, from Akwa Ibom State, and there is something that happens to your whole being when you eat afang soup and fufu or gari or any kind of swallow.
What happens to your state?
What happens is that you feel grounded, you feel energized, you feel rooted in this culinary experience.
I think, in my opinion, it has to do with the fact that you left Nigeria late at an considerably old age. You're already grown up. Because if you have a kid here, they are not going to be rooted to afang soup the way, even if they start eating it, even if you are giving them the food from childhood, because they are in a different and new environment where they will encounter all sorts of different kinds of food. I have the same experience with you. I can't let go of Nigerian food. I left Nigeria when I was 29, so I'm already strongly grounded in the Nigerian food culture. So it will be very difficult for me to let go.
Good people, thank you very much. You've been lovely. And,
Thank you for having us.
We will continue to discuss this jollof issue because it's very contested. But for now, until our next episode, Cameroon wins the jollof wars.
No!
Thank you very much.
Bye. You cannot do that when you have Nigerian guests.
Thank you.
Bye.
The Silas Podcast.
Silas Edwin is a Nigerian-born musician who came to Germany in 2000 for a cultural exchange and decided to stay back in Germany. Silas is the son of a clergy who learned to play music in the church in Nigeria. And then coming to Germany, he found his musical skill something he could leverage on, to cope in this diasporic setting. So Silas came to Germany. He started what he called the Sing Out Gospel Choir Project. Initially, his motivation was to use music as an evangelistic tool, because of his religious background. But later, he discovered that it was not going to be successful pulling the, religious narrative with his music. Then he went into what he then describes as gospel choir project, but not for evangelistic purpose, but this time around for entertainment, because in Germany, American music generally, and especially American gospel music is patronized. So Silas took on this music, and he's been doing that in the last 24 years.
And as a Nigerian in Germany, it can't be easy to do this.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. One of the strategies Silas used was to organize choirs at different cities or in different cities. He starts with the major cities. He brings singers together. They practice, they sing. They practice, they rehearse songs, and then they stage a concert. And then he was going from one city to another, doing this. And with that kind of initiative, that kind of identity, because again, the German older audience, they are sick and tired of the Western classical music, Handel, Bach, Mozart. So Silas's music offering became like a new material for them, to get them into the American popular culture, and more importantly, to encounter African music, because he only used the American music to bring them in, and then he introduces them to African music. Music from South Africa, from Nigeria, from Yoruba speaking music, Igbo, and all that. So Silas he played two cards, like I've expounded in some of my work, that he played the ethnic card, and he also played his artistic card. That look, I'm a musician, but I'm also African.
And in Germany, generally speaking, and here we are in 21st century Europe, there's an anti-immigrant sentiment that's quite strong. And of course, xenophobia is closely tied to racism. And so there's remarkable work being done here, because it's not just entertainment here. We're dealing with social change. And the image, as you said, of African immigrants is impacted by this kind of work. Here's an almost all-white choir taking on this amazing new repertoire. You've seen it. What's it like?
I must confess to you, it's massive, it's amazing. The first time I went for his rehearsal and I saw the passion, with which these white singers responded to Silas, I was like, at the point I asked him, I said, I hope you're not using something supernatural on these people, because it is very difficult for you to find a migrant, having that kind of strong, grip on, whites. It's amazing. And you see the enthusiasm in performance. They're willing to sing African songs. They're willing to dance as rigid as Germans can be. They dance. They dance. You see them. Their hands, their feet. Dancing, especially when it is Afrobeat. The Afrobeat, when he sings, he introduces them to Afrobeats. And then one very insightful experience is the spiritual dimension in the group. Even though many of them talk about we are not a religious group, but when we get to performance, because I also perform with them on stage, there's this affection that comes whenever we do gospel music. You find the stage is changed. And some of the people I asked, they said, yes, this music, this choir gets me into some level of spirituality. And I found that very interesting. Another important thing is the community it builds. It's a large community. People coming from different backgrounds, coming to sing together. You see conviviality. And then it's also retelling the African migrant story, which has been on the negative.
Sure. Around
criminality, crime, drug. But this is somebody who is saying, no, I am not just here to take from the social offering of this country, but I'm also giving to the socio-cultural, musical, opportunities that abound in this country. So, in sum, Silas is influencing the choral music landscape in Germany.
All in all, the workshop was a productive and promising event. The possibilities for digital scholarship through the podcasting medium are endless. We're excited to hear what podcasts emerge from this workshop and across the African Studies Podscape. And we hope to see you at ASA 2025 in Atlanta. See you then. This podcast episode is part of ASA Pod and is brought to you by the African Studies Association in the U.S., the ASA Professionalization and Career Training, or PACT, workshop, and the ASA Emerging Scholars Network. Production was a collaborative effort by Alix, Reed, Mohammed, Martha, Chimnirem, Daniel, Hoseana, Samuel, Kasonde, Anatoly, Rachel, Chikezi, Johanna, Kevin, Rachel, Satang, Dean, Michael, Bamba, Reginold, and me, Peter Alegi. Thanks for listening.